The night should have been quiet. That was the only mercy the dead world still offered. Silence, no cities humming, no engines roaring, no distant laughter drifting through open windows, only wind moving through abandoned streets and the endless, broken footsteps of the dead. Across the ruined highways of Georgia, the walkers wandered like ghosts that had forgotten where they were going. Their skin hung loose from their bones. Their eyes were pale and empty, staring at nothing. A rusted pickup truck creaked slowly in the wind. A traffic light blinked red, then green, then red again. No one stopped. No one cared. The world had ended months ago. The sky above the forest was thick with clouds, slow and heavy like a storm that had lost its way. Moonlight barely pushed through the gray ceiling of the night, but something in the sky was wrong. The clouds were moving, not drifting, twisting, bending inward as if the air itself had started breathing. At first it was just a distant glow, a small streak of light sliding silently through the darkness. Then the glow grew brighter, faster, angrier. A burning object tore across the atmosphere like a spear thrown by a god. Fire wrapped around it as it cut through the sky. The clouds ripped open. A sonic scream rolled across the land, shaking windows in empty houses and sending crows exploding out of dead trees. Walkers stopped, hundreds of them. Their heads slowly tilted upward. Even the dead could sense disturbance. The object fell lower, closer. Now the fire around it began to change. Not red, not orange, black. Something inside the burning shell was moving, stretching, pressing against the surface like a living thing trying to escape its cage. The ground began to tremble. Deer bolted through the forest in blind panic. Birds scattered. A pack of wolves howled once, then ran. And then, the sky broke. The object slammed into the forest with a sound so violent, it shattered branches miles away. The explosion tore a crater into the earth, throwing dirt and broken trees into the air like shrapnel. For several seconds, the world went silent again. Smoke rose slowly into the night. Burning wood crackled. Leaves drifted down like dark snow. At the center of the crater, something black moved beneath the wreckage. It slid across the rocks like thick oil. Alive. Hungry. Ancient. The thing had crossed stars. It had survived worlds collapsing into dust. It had worn the bodies of warriors, tyrants, and monsters. Now it had arrived somewhere new. The black mass spread slowly across the crater floor, tasting the soil, the air, the dying insects buried in the dirt. This planet was strange, broken, rotting. The smell of death covered everything, and then the creature heard something. Footsteps, hundreds of them. The walkers had begun moving toward the crater. Drawn by sound, drawn by movement, their bodies stumbled through the trees, arms twitching, jaws opening and closing as they followed instinct older than thought. The first walker fell into the crater. Its legs snapped as it tumbled down the rocks. The creature watched, studied. The corpse dragged itself forward with rotten fingers. Its milky eyes stared into the darkness. The black mass hesitated, then it moved. A tendril shot forward and wrapped around the walker's skull. The creature dug into the flesh, into the bone, into the ruined brain, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, the symbiote tasted the mind of this world. Rot, virus, decay. Something unnatural lived inside the corpse, something that made death refuse to stay dead. The symbiote paused. Then slowly, it laughed. A deep, wet, inhuman sound bubbling from inside the darkness. Because the creature had come expecting prey, instead, it had found an entire planet of corpses that walked. More walkers tumbled into the crater. 10. 20. 50. The black mass expanded across the ground like a spreading shadow. Tendrils erupted outward. Bodies were pulled apart, consumed, examined, adapted. The symbiote began learning the rules of this dying world, and then it understood something terrifying. The walkers were not the rulers here. Somewhere out there, real minds still existed, real hosts, real power. The symbiote slowly rose from the crater floor, forming the shape of something tall and terrible. A towering black silhouette against the burning wreckage, its white eyes opened for the first time. And somewhere deep within the alien consciousness, a voice whispered through the night. A voice that had devoured civilizations. A voice that had survived eternity. A voice that now belonged to Earth. We are Venom. Long before the dead walked the earth, before cities collapsed into skeletons of steel, before humanity learned the slow mathematics of survival, the creature already existed. Not as a monster. Not yet. In the cold darkness between stars, where light itself seemed tired, there was a race older than most civilizations could comprehend. They were called Clintar, living symbiotes born in cosmic darkness. They had no cities, no flags, no gods carved from stone. Their bodies were liquid shadows, constantly shifting, constantly searching. They survived by bonding with other life forms. Hosts. Together, they became stronger, faster, smarter. Warriors forged from two minds, sharing one body. Some Clintar chose noble hosts. They protected worlds. They fought tyrants. They kept the balance between creation and destruction. But not all symbiotes were gentle. Some of them discovered something intoxicating inside their hosts: emotion, rage, fear, hunger. The darker instincts of living creatures burned brighter than stars, and once a symbiote tasted those instincts, it was very hard to let them go. One symbiote in particular became obsessed. It bonded with warriors, conquerors, killers who felt no guilt. Each host fed the creature something new: violence, dominance, the thrill of survival. The symbiote grew stronger with every bond, but it also grew unstable. Its hunger became endless, its voice louder. Soon it stopped seeking balance. It began seeking power. Entire planets learned to fear the living darkness that descended from the sky wearing the bodies of their champions. Worlds burned. Empires collapsed. Armies died screaming as a black titan tore through their defenses like paper. The other Clintar tried to stop it. They believed symbiotes were meant to guide hosts, not dominate them. But this one had changed. It had tasted too much chaos, too much war, too much freedom. They called it Venom, and eventually, even the Clintar feared what it was becoming. So they did what desperate civilizations always do when facing something uncontrollable. They tried to cage it. An ancient prison was built from living energy and alien technology. The symbiote was sealed away far from any living world. No hosts, no prey, only endless silence. Years passed, then centuries. Then something unexpected happened. A war between distant alien empires shattered the prison. Weapons designed to erase planets tore open the structure holding the creature. Fragments of the prison scattered across space like broken glass, and the symbiote escaped. Free again, hungry again, it drifted through the void for years, clinging to debris, waiting for another living world to claim. Many planets were too advanced, too protected, too dangerous. But then it found something strange: a blue planet filled with life and death. Signals from broken satellites, cities with no electricity, military communications cut mid-sentence. The planet looked wounded, weak, perfect. The symbiote entered the atmosphere like a meteor, burning through clouds that had never seen anything like it. But as it descended closer to the surface, it sensed something disturbing. Millions of dead bodies were moving, walking, crawling, hunting, yet none of them were alive. The symbiote had devoured thousands of minds across the galaxy, but it had never encountered a world where death itself had become a form of life. At first, it thought the planet was cursed, broken beyond usefulness. But then another realization came, a darker one. If the dead could walk, then this world would never run out of hosts, never run out of bodies, never run out of hunger. The symbiote plunged through the clouds, toward forests, toward highways, toward the ruined bones of civilization. And when it struck the earth that night, the creature that had once terrorized galaxies finally understood something new. This planet wasn't just a place to survive. It was a playground of endless evolution, a world already consumed by apocalypse, a world already drowning in corpses, a world where a predator like Venom could grow into something far worse. And somewhere in the quiet woods of Georgia, inside a smoking crater, the symbiote slowly spread across the dirt and whispered to itself. A voice thick with hunger, a voice excited by possibility, a voice that had crossed galaxies to find its perfect hunting ground. This world is already dying. The black mass stretched outward like a living shadow, tasting the soil, the air, the blood of nearby walkers. Then the voice whispered again, lower, colder, more certain. We will make it evolve. Morning in the apocalypse did not arrive with hope. It arrived slowly, like a wound reopening. Fog rolled across the empty highway outside the prison walls. The road was still clogged with rusted vehicles, their windows shattered, their seats rotted by years of rain and dust. Grass had grown through cracked asphalt. Nature was reclaiming the bones of civilization. But even nature had become quiet, too quiet. Inside the prison courtyard, the survivors were already awake. Sleep had become a fragile thing. Rick Grimes stood on the watchtower, his revolver resting against the wooden railing. The weapon felt heavier these days, as if the weight of every decision he had made was slowly sinking into the metal. Below him, the camp was stirring. Carol knelt beside a small fire, stirring a pot of thin soup that smelled mostly like boiled weeds in desperation. Glenn and Maggie checked the outer fence, tightening the wire that held back the walkers who constantly pressed against the prison walls like a tide that refused to recede. Daryl sat quietly on an overturned crate, cleaning the limbs of his crossbow. No one spoke much in the mornings. Conversation required energy, and energy was something the world had stolen from everyone. Beyond the prison fences, the walkers gathered slowly. Some of them had been standing there for weeks. Their skin sagged from bone, their teeth snapped endlessly at the air. The dead were patient. They had all the time in the world. Carl moved carefully across the courtyard, carrying a small bucket of water from the rain collector. He was too young for the world he lived in, but the apocalypse had erased childhood. The boy had learned how to shoot before he learned how to shave. He had watched friends die before he had ever been to a high school classroom. And still, somehow, he kept going. The survivors had learned the rules of this new world. Every day was a ritual of survival. Wake up, check the fences, clear walkers from the perimeter, search nearby buildings for anything useful, canned food, medicine, batteries, anything the old world had left behind. Then return before sunset. Because when night came, the world became even worse. Rick scanned the forest beyond the prison yard. Something about the trees felt wrong. The wind moved through the branches, but the usual sounds were missing. No birds, no insects, no distant animal calls, just silence. A silence thick enough to feel. Daryl noticed it too. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing as he stared toward the tree line. "Y'all hear that?" he muttered. Glenn looked up. "Hear what?" Daryl didn't answer immediately. That was the problem. There was nothing to hear. In a world filled with the dead, silence was dangerous. Rick leaned forward slightly on the watchtower. "Something spooked the animals," he said quietly. Michonne walked across the yard, her katana resting on her shoulder. "The dead don't scare animals," she replied. Rick nodded slowly. "I know." For several seconds, no one moved. Then a walker slammed against the outer fence, then another, then another. Within minutes, dozens of them were gathering at the wire. But something about their movement looked different. Normally, walkers drifted randomly. They wandered without purpose, like broken machines following half-remembered instincts. Today, they were coming from the same direction. From deep inside the forest, dozens turned into hundreds. More and more of them emerged from between the trees, all moving toward the prison, or rather, moving past it. They barely even noticed the survivors behind the fence. Their dead eyes stared towards something far beyond the prison walls, something deeper in the woods. Rick felt a cold sensation crawl up his spine. "What the hell?" Glenn whispered. Michonne stepped closer to the fence, watching the endless line of corpses stumble through the grass. "They're migrating." "That ain't normal," Daryl said. "No," Rick replied quietly. "It isn't." Carl climbed the watchtower ladder and joined his father at the top. Together they looked out over the land. A river of the dead was flowing through the forest. Thousands of them, moving in one direction. Drawn by something none of the survivors could see, something powerful enough to pull the dead away from easy prey. Rick had spent months studying the behavior of walkers. They followed sound, movement, smell. They were predictable, stupid. But this felt organized, deliberate, as if the dead were responding to a signal. Rick looked toward the distant forest where the horde disappeared between the trees. Something was happening out there, something new. And in the apocalypse, new things were rarely good. The wind shifted slightly. A strange scent drifted through the air. Burned metal, rotting flesh, and something else. Something unfamiliar. Something alien. Rick frowned. "Do you smell that?" Carl nodded slowly. "Yeah." Below them, Daryl was already climbing onto his motorcycle. Michonne stepped toward him. "You're not thinking about following them?" Daryl slung his crossbow over his shoulder. That many walkers don't just move like that for no reason. Rick climbed down from the tower. Then we find out what they're chasing. The group paired quickly. Weapons checked. Ammo counted. Knives sharpened. Another supply run. Another gamble with death. But none of them understood the truth waiting for them beyond the forest. Because miles away, at the center of a shattered crater surrounded by broken trees, a towering black creature stood in the smoke. Walkers stumbled toward it endlessly. Hundreds. Thousands. And each time one reached the creature, a black tendril lashed outward. Bodies were ripped apart. Bones crushed. Rotten brains devoured. The creature was learning. Adapting. Growing stronger with every corpse. Its massive white eyes stared into the distance. Toward the prison. Toward the survivors. Toward the last stubborn fragments of humanity. And deep within the alien mind, a voice whispered with quiet satisfaction. A voice that had crossed galaxies. A voice that had finally found the perfect world. This planet feeds us well. More walkers crawled toward the creature, and Venom opened its jaws wider. Far from the prison, far from the forests filled with wandering corpses, humanity had not completely disappeared. It had simply gone underground, deep beneath layers of reinforced concrete, hidden under what used to be a military research facility. A bunker still hummed with electricity. The lights were harsh, artificial, cold. Inside the command center, dozens of monitors glowed in the darkness like watchful eyes. Satellite feeds, drone cameras, thermal scans, remnants of a world that once believed technology could control chaos. Here, the apocalypse was not accepted. It was studied, analyzed, fought. The organization called itself the Recovery Directorate, a collection of surviving military officers, scientists, and intelligence analysts who refused to accept that civilization had ended. Their mission was simple: understand the infection, control the outbreak, rebuild the world. At least, that was the official purpose. But as months passed, desperation had begun to twist that mission into something darker, because the truth about the virus had already broken most of them. Everyone was infected. Every human on Earth carried the pathogen now known as wildfire. Death did not matter anymore. Every corpse would rise again. Every person was already doomed. The scientists had tested everything: blood, tissue, brain activity, radiation. Nothing stopped it. Nothing slowed it. The dead walked because something inside the virus forced their bodies to move, and no one knew why. But then, 3 nights ago, the satellites detected something impossible. Major David Harlow stood over the central monitoring table as a video replay filled the main screen. A streak of light ripping across the upper atmosphere. The footage came from a weather satellite that had survived the collapse of global communication. The object moved too fast, too controlled. It wasn't falling randomly like a meteor. It changed direction before impact. One of the scientists adjusted the playback speed, frame by frame. The room went silent. Because inside the burning meteor, something moved. A dark shape pressed against the fire like a living thing trying to escape. Dr. Lena Ortiz leaned closer to the screen. "That's not debris," she whispered. Major Harlow crossed his arms. "What are you saying?" The scientist hesitated. Her voice came out slower, more careful. "I'm saying whatever hit the forest wasn't dead rock." The room fell quiet again. In the apocalypse, humans had already accepted the impossible. But some possibilities were still too disturbing to say out loud. Harlow finally spoke. "Launch the drone." Minutes later, one of the last functioning reconnaissance drones lifted from the bunker's surface launch pad. Its small rotors cut through the cold night air as it rose above the forest canopy. The operators guided it toward the impact site using satellite coordinates. Smoke was still visible from miles away. The drone camera streamed live footage to the bunker screens. Burned trees, shadowed earth, a massive crater carved into the forest. The drone descended slowly. The scientists leaned closer to the monitors. "Zoom in," Harlow ordered. The camera focused on the crater floor. At first there was nothing, just scorched soil and broken branches. Then something moved. A black liquid shape slid across the ground. It didn't behave like oil. It moved with intention, like muscle, like nerves. Dr. Ortiz felt her stomach tighten. "Stop the drone," she said suddenly. "Why?" Harlow asked. "Because it just noticed us." The black mass in the crater slowly rose upward, forming a towering humanoid shape, tall, broad, covered in living darkness. Then the creature looked directly into the drone camera. Two enormous white eyes opened. The feed crackled. Static crawled across the monitor. Then the creature jumped. The drone camera spun violently as a black tendril slammed into it. For half a second, the screen filled with a monstrous face. Rows of jagged teeth. A mouth too large to belong to anything human. And a voice burst through the speakers. Wet, deep, alien, food. The signal cut. The screen went black. No one in the bunker spoke for nearly a full minute. Finally, Major Harlow exhaled slowly. What the hell did we just see? Dr. Ortiz didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were still locked on the dark screen, running possibilities through her mind. Alien biology, parasitic organism, adaptive life form. But the worst thought was the one she couldn't ignore. Major, she said quietly. If that thing can survive on this planet, Harlow looked at her. She finished the sentence slowly. Then the walkers aren't the apex predator anymore. Silence settled across the bunker. Above them, the forest continued rotting under a dying sky. Walkers wandered endlessly through abandoned towns. Human survivors clung to fragile communities. But now something new had entered the equation. Something that had crossed the stars, something intelligent, something hungry. And somewhere in the darkness of the forest, Venom was already searching for its first true host. The forest had grown thick since the world died, without chainsaws, without roads being cleared, without human noise driving them away. The trees had taken the land back with quiet patience. Branches twisted over abandoned trails, roots cracked the old pavement beneath the soil. Nature had begun rebuilding its kingdom, but the dead still walked through it. Rick's group moved carefully between the trees, stepping over fallen logs and broken branches. Their boots sank into damp soil as they followed the path the walkers had taken earlier that morning. Hundreds of footprints. Thousands, maybe. The ground was churned with mud and rot. Daryl crouched low beside a tree and studied the tracks. "Ain't normal," he muttered. Rick stopped behind him. "How many you think passed through here?" Daryl spat to the side. "Too damn many." Machen scanned the forest around them, her katana resting lightly in her hand. The woods felt wrong. Even the walkers had made less noise than usual. No distant groaning. No snapping twigs. Only wind. And the smell. Burnt metal. Rotting flesh. Something chemical and unfamiliar drifting through the air. Glenn spoke quietly from the back of the group. "You guys feel that?" Rick turned slightly. "Feel what?" Glenn swallowed. "Like pressure." Carl looked up at the sky through the branches. The clouds above them were darker here. Thicker. Like the forest itself was holding its breath. They walked for another 20 minutes. Then Daryl stopped suddenly. "Don't move." Everyone froze. Ahead of them, the trees had been blasted apart. A massive scar cut through the forest like the earth itself had been wounded. Branches snapped. Soil overturned. The smell of burning still lingered in the air. Rick stepped forward slowly. Then he saw it, the crater, nearly 50 yards wide. The ground inside it was blackened and cracked like the surface of a dead moon. Something had hit here hard enough to shake the entire forest. Glenn stared. "A meteor?" Daryl shook his head slowly. "Ain't never seen a rock do that." Carl moved closer to the edge of the crater. The dirt beneath his boots crumbled slightly. Then he noticed something. "Dad." Rick stepped beside him. "What is it?" Carl pointed. "Bodies. Walkers. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. But something about them was wrong. Their skulls were broken open, their rib cages crushed inward, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles. And worst of all, many of them looked like their skin had been peeled away. Michonne knelt beside one of the corpses. Her blade gently pushed the empty skull aside. "No bite marks," she said quietly. "No gunshots." Glenn looked sick. Then what the hell did that? The wind shifted again. The smell grew stronger. Rick felt the hairs on his neck stand up. Daryl slowly raised his crossbow. "You hear that?" At first there was nothing. Then a wet sound. Somewhere inside the crater. Like something moving through thick mud. The survivors stepped closer together. Rick slowly pulled his revolver from its holster. The sound came again, slithering, stretching, breathing. And then something black rose from behind a broken tree trunk. At first, it looked like oil climbing across the wood. But the liquid began forming shapes. Muscle. Limbs. A massive torso covered in shifting darkness. The creature stood taller than any man. Its body rippled like living armor. Two enormous white eyes opened on a head that had no real face. And then its mouth appeared. A jagged grin full of teeth that did not belong on this planet. Carl whispered one word. "Dad." The creature looked directly at them, studying them, learning. Then it spoke. The voice came from deep inside the black mass. Wet, alien, ancient, alive. Rick fired first. The revolver cracked through the forest. The bullet struck the creature's chest and bounced away, like it had hit solid steel. The monster tilted its head slightly, curious. Then it moved, faster than anything Rick had ever seen. A black tendril shot across the crater. It wrapped around Glenn's leg. Before anyone could react, Glenn was dragged screaming across the dirt. Rick fired again, and again. The bullets did nothing. Michonne charged forward with her katana raised high. The blade sliced through the black mass, but the wound instantly closed like liquid. The creature laughed, a deep, terrible sound that vibrated through the trees. Stronger hosts. Another tendril shot forward, this time toward Carl. Rick dove forward and tackled his son aside just as the black whip slammed into the dirt where Carl had been standing. "R-U-N!" Rick shouted. The survivors scattered through the forest. Behind them, the creature expanded outward, its body stretching across the crater like a spreading shadow. It had tasted something new, living minds, real fear, real strength, and it wanted more. Glenn managed to cut himself free with a knife and scrambled toward the trees. Barrel fired bolt after bolt from his crossbow as they retreated. None of them slowed the creature. Behind them, Venom rose higher, taller, its enormous white eyes glowing in the darkness. It watched the humans run, studying their speed, their fear, their potential. Then the alien voice whispered softly into the forest. A promise, a warning, a hunger that had crossed galaxies to arrive here. Run. The creature's mouth stretched wider, rows of teeth glistening in the dim light. We will find better hosts soon. And somewhere deep inside Rick's chest, for the first time since the world ended, he felt something worse than the walkers. Something worse than death, because the apocalypse had just evolved, and humanity was no longer the only thing hunting in the dark. The forest swallowed their footsteps. Branches snapped beneath boots as Rick's group ran through the trees, lungs burning, hearts hammering against their ribs. No one spoke. No one looked back, because they all knew something was following them. Not a walker. Walkers stumbled. Walkers groaned. Walkers were slow. This thing was none of those things. Daryl ran ahead, weaving between trees with the instincts of a hunter who had spent his life in the wilderness. "Don't stop," he barked over his shoulder. Behind him, Glenn stumbled once before regaining his balance. Carl kept pace beside his father, gripping his pistol so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. The forest seemed darker now. Every shadow felt alive. Every movement in the branches made their nerves jump. Rick finally risked a glance behind them. Nothing. Just trees swaying gently in the wind. But he could still feel it, watching, learning, waiting. They didn't stop running until the prison fence finally appeared through the trees. Metal wire. Guard towers. Home. The gate slammed shut behind them as they stumbled into the yard. Carol rushed forward. What happened? Rick didn't answer immediately. He leaned against the fence, breathing hard. For a moment, the only sound was the wind scraping across the prison walls. Then Glenn spoke. His voice was quiet, shaken. That thing wasn't a walker. No one disagreed. Michonne wiped dark residue from her blade with a rag. The black substance clung to the steel like thick oil. "It healed," she said. Rick looked up. "What?" "I cut it," Michonne continued, "right across the chest." She held up the katana. "There should have been blood." Carl frowned. "But there wasn't." Michonne nodded slowly. It closed like liquid. Daryl leaned his crossbow against the fence. "That ain't the worst part." Everyone looked at him. He pointed toward the black smear still stuck to the blade. "That stuff's still moving." They all leaned closer. And he was right. The dark residue twitched slightly, like a dying insect, like something trying to crawl back together. Carol stepped back instinctively. "What is that?" Rick stared at the strange substance. His voice came out lower. "I don't know." But somewhere deep in his mind, a terrible realization had already begun forming. This wasn't just a monster. It was something worse, something that could change. Miles away, in the shattered crater where the creature had first landed, The symbiote studied its surroundings. The forest had grown quiet again. Walkers still wandered through the trees, drawn by the sounds of earlier violence. They stumbled into the crater one by one, and each time they did, venom consumed them. The creature moved differently now, more stable, more defined. The symbiote had already learned the basic biology of Earth's dominant species: muscles, bone structure, neural pathways. Human anatomy was simple compared to the alien organisms it had worn before. But this planet had something unusual: the virus, wildfire, the parasite that lived inside every human brain, even the dead ones. Venom had tasted it dozens of times now. Each walker devoured had given it more data, more understanding. The virus reanimated dead tissue by stimulating the brainstem. It kept corpses moving long after life had vanished. Primitive, inefficient, but useful, very useful. The symbiote experimented. A black tendril slid across the corpse of a nearby walker. Instead of devouring it completely, venom forced its own biomass inside the dead body. The walker twitched violently. Bones snapped as the symbiote spread through its limbs like invasive roots. For a moment, the corpse collapsed again. Then it stood. But this time, the walker moved differently. Its head turned smoothly. Its arms flexed with controlled strength. Black veins pulsed beneath its rotten skin. The symbiote had discovered something new. Walkers were empty. Their minds were gone. But their bodies still functioned, which meant they could be controlled. Venom slowly stepped back as the reanimated corpse stood obediently before it. A puppet. A soldier. An extension of its will. The creature's massive white eyes narrowed slightly. Possibilities began multiplying inside its alien mind. This world had billions of corpses walking its surface, billions of bodies with no minds left to fight back. The symbiote stretched upward, its towering form casting a long shadow across the crater. Then the voice echoed quietly through the forest, a voice filled with dark amusement. Weapons everywhere. More walkers stumbled toward the crater. Venom extended dozens of tendrils, each one stabbing into a new corpse. More bodies began standing, more puppets rising. An army was forming, not of the living, not of the dead, but something in between, something controlled by a predator from another world. And deep beneath the forest canopy, Venom made a decision. The humans it had encountered earlier were stronger than the walkers, smarter, better hosts. They would be hunted later, but first, the symbiote needed numbers. Miles away, Rick stood on the prison watchtower again. The sun was beginning to set. Orange light stretched across the forest horizon. Everything looked peaceful. But Rick could feel the tension in the air. The world had changed again. He just didn't know how yet. Carl stood beside him, scanning the trees with binoculars. "Do you think it's still out there?" the boy asked. Rick stared into the darkening forest. His answer came slowly. "Yeah." He didn't look away from the trees. "And I think it's learning." The world had a way of breaking people slowly. Not in explosions or screams, but in the quiet moments between them. The survivors had been together for months, moving through forests and ruins, fighting walkers, scavengers, and the emptiness of a dead world. They trusted each other because they had to, but trust was fragile. Fragile like the brittle bones of the dead underfoot. Inside the prison walls, the group gathered in the central courtyard, weapons laid out on tables for inspection. Rick leaned on a railing, staring at the fading sunlight. "They're organizing," he said quietly. Michonne didn't respond. She was cleaning her katana, methodical, precise. Daryl spat into the dirt, organizing. Rick didn't look at him. The walkers. The ones we saw moving together, something's leading them. Something smart. Glenn shifted uneasily. "You're saying something alive is controlling them?" Rick nodded. "Or something we've never fought before. Something that doesn't stop." The group fell silent. Carl's voice broke through the tension. "Dad, what if we can't stop it?" Rick didn't answer immediately. He hated admitting fear, hated even thinking it, but he couldn't lie to his son. "Then we survive," he said, voice low. "We survive until we figure it out." Hours later, as night draped the prison in shadows, arguments began to flare. Carol and Rick disagreed over patrol schedules. Daryl refused to stay inside for long, claiming the perimeter needed constant watching. Even Glenn and Maggie, usually calm, found themselves on edge, snapping at each other over the smallest details. Humans became predictable when afraid, but the real fracture began when the first body appeared. At the edge of the courtyard, a walker lay dead, or at least it appeared so. Its chest had been crushed, its limbs twisted in unnatural angles. Black veins ran beneath its decayed flesh, pulsating faintly. No one recognized it. Michonne knelt beside it, her katana hovering over the pulsing veins. "This isn't like anything we've seen." Rick examined the corpse carefully. "It's been modified. Not by us. Not by a walker. Something else." Daryl's eyes narrowed. "So what do we do?" Rick looked at each of them. Their faces showed the same mix of fear and uncertainty he felt. "Survive," he said finally. "We hold the walls, we stay together, and we figure it out before it finds us." But humans are flawed creatures, and flaws grow faster when fear has roots. Whispers began. Accusations, suspicions. Why did he go outside alone? She's hoarding ammo. They're hiding something from us. Even Rick felt it, gnawing at the edges of his certainty. Every night, he lay awake, listening to the groans of the walkers outside the fences. But now the groans sounded different. Measured. Deliberate. Watching. And deeper in the forest, a shadow moved among the trees. Venom. It had learned their habits, their patterns, their weaknesses. It had seen them bicker, seen them doubt, seen them fracture. The alien voice whispered in the blackness, low and dry, like iron scraping stone. Divide them, confuse them. Fear makes them weak. By the next morning, mistrust had taken root. Small decisions were questioned, commands ignored, eyes darted at every shadow, and Venom was patient. It didn't need to strike immediately, because humans, when afraid, often destroyed themselves faster than any predator ever could. Rick walked the perimeter alone that night. The wind carried the smell of blackened earth and something else, something oily and alive. He paused, gripping his revolver tightly. A tendril slithered over a broken tree root nearby. He froze. The forest was silent. Then the voice came. Soft, almost casual. "They are already afraid. Good. Fear makes them mine." Rick swallowed hard. And somewhere deep inside, he understood. The real enemy wasn't just the dead. It wasn't just what walked. It was the darkness that can make humans doubt each other and themselves. And trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. Rite 8. Chapter 8. The Corruption Arc. Darkness has a way of creeping in slowly, like smoke through a cracked window, until it fills the room completely. For Rick's group, for humanity, the darkness had changed its shape. It no longer lurked just in the forests filled with walkers. It had become something alive, something that could learn, adapt, and spread. Venom had grown. Each host it claimed added strength. Each corpse it devoured added knowledge. The symbiote had discovered how to manipulate the virus that animated the dead, the same pathogen that had once been the apex predator of Earth. Now, the dead were tools, weapons, extensions of a single alien will. It began small at first. Towns would vanish overnight. Travelers would find entire communities wiped clean, their corpses twisted, reanimated, and reshaped into something neither dead nor fully alive. Humans whispered stories by the fire. The Black Devil, the shadow that devours both living and dead. The plague that grows smarter than its victims. Some claimed to see the symbiote crawling into the broken skulls of walkers, merging with them, creating abominations that moved with precision. They had learned coordination, strategy, tactics. The survivors at the prison noticed the first signs of corruption close to home. A walker wandered unusually close to the fence, moving in a straight line instead of the usual staggering, aimless shuffle. Its eyes glimmered faintly white in the moonlight. When it reached the fence, it stopped. The veins pulsing beneath its decayed flesh were blacker than anything they'd seen. Daryl froze, gripping his crossbow. "This ain't normal." Carol shivered. "It's listening." Rick's stomach tightened. He had studied the dead for months. He had anticipated patterns, tricks, weaknesses. But this was something new. The dead were no longer predictable. They were being directed. Miles away, in the forest's ruined heart, Venom expanded its domain. Tendrils slipped into every corpse it could find. Rotting limbs rose with black veins pulsing beneath their skin. Hollow eyes focused. The hive was growing. Each new body added a node to the network. Each reanimated corpse carried the alien intelligence a little farther into the world. The corruption was not limited to the dead. The living were next. Venom experimented on stragglers it caught alone in the woods. Hunters, scavengers, survivors who moved with skill and cunning. The symbiote tested them, bonded with them, tasted their fear, twisted their minds. Sometimes it released them, sometimes it kept them. Each host left a scar on its consciousness. Another lesson in strategy and manipulation. In the prison, the atmosphere had shifted. Nights became tense, voices harsher, glances sharper. Humans could feel it. Fear had become tangible. The air seemed heavier. Sleep came less and less. Even Carl, hardened beyond his years, began waking at odd hours, convinced the shadows were watching him. And the whispers in the dark were not human. Venom's voice curled through the forest like smoke, low, patient, almost playful. Power is simple. Obedience is delicious. Madness is inevitable. Those words were more than a warning. They were a promise. Elsewhere, humans attempted to fight back. Traps were set. Scouts sent into the woods. Weapons tested against walkers in futile attempts to measure the symbiote's strength. Each effort ended in failure. Bullets bounced. Knives tore through nothing but regenerated flesh. Even fire, which had always been the most reliable tool against the dead, merely slowed the corruption for hours, not days. The world was changing faster than they could comprehend. By the time the sun rose one morning, Venom had a small army. Scores of corpses moved in silence, controlled by an intelligence that had devoured millennia of experience across the galaxy. Rick watched them from the prison watchtower. Every instinct screamed at him that nothing they had done before could stop this. He looked down at the courtyard. "Prepare for the worst," he muttered. Carl's eyes widened. "The dead? They're not even dead anymore, are they?" Rick shook his head. "No. They belong to something else now. And it's learning." The wind shifted. A faint, oily scent drifted through the prison walls. The corruption had arrived at their doorstep. And deep in the forest, where smoke rose from a broken crater, Venom whispered again, "Everything you know is mine. Everything you are can be mine. The world will learn how we survive." And for the first time, humanity realized the apocalypse was no longer theirs to endure. It belonged to something far older, far smarter, far hungrier. Even in a world consumed by death and alien corruption, stories persisted. Tales whispered around fires, shouted across rooftops, scribbled on walls in blood and ash. They were fragments of what had been, echoes of heroism, madness, and survival. The hero Rick Grimes had always believed he could protect the people around him. One night, as the black horde of corrupted walkers moved toward the prison, he stood at the watchtower alone, revolver heavy in his hands. The creatures advanced with unnatural precision, their eyes glinting with the white sheen of Venom's control. Bullets had little effect. Fire slowed them only for moments. Rick's mind raced. Every plan he'd learned, every trick from his months of surviving the dead, now seemed inadequate. But he refused to yield. "I remember the sound," he whispered to himself. The crunch of wood, the snap of limbs, the wet tearing of corrupted flesh. It was a symphony of horror, yet he clung to it, memorizing every note. He aimed at a tendril creeping toward the fence. Fired. The metal bent, the weapon jammed. He switched to his second revolver, bullets scorching the air. The tide of the dead pressed closer. One of the corrupted walkers lunged through the tower gate. Rick shot it square in the head. The skull split open, black fangs curling outward, lashing toward him. He rolled, fired again, hit another. The creature paused, curious, and then it retreated slightly, its hive mind testing his strength. By dawn, the survivors had learned more than from weeks of patrols. Rick had shown that courage, even fragile, could slow the unthinkable. But the cost was high. The hero's body bore scratches and bruises, his hands blistered, his soul heavier than ever. Even heroes could not win alone. The traitor Glenn had been careful, honest, loyal, until hunger, fear, and exhaustion clouded his judgment. One night, in the shadowed corridors of the prison, he found himself alone with a walker that had black veins pulsing under its decayed flesh. The symbiote had touched it, and it had survived intact. A whisper in his mind subtle, foreign, intoxicating. He touched the creature. The pulse of something alive, intelligent, whispered promises, survival, strength, control. Glenn tried to resist, but the world had taught him to bend when needed. One touch became two. One decision became a pattern. By morning, he had smuggled a small fragment of the symbiote into the infirmary, hiding it from Rick and the others. It was a betrayal done quietly, without malice, without thinking of consequences. The next day, the fragment merged with a corpse, and the dead began to move differently. Faster, smarter, organized. Glenn's name became whispered among the survivors later, not with admiration, but fear. The traitor had not meant to destroy them, but corruption has a way of thriving in the smallest acts of weakness. The survivor Carol had survived more than most. Lost her family, her home, her peace, yet she endured, mastering the art of silence, observation, and timing. When the horde first came under Venom's influence, Carol led a group of survivors through a side tunnel beneath the prison. She crawled silently, blood from a walker's bite on her hand, yet managed to remain unnoticed. She watched as the black tendrils twisted over the bodies, heard the whispers, and felt the alien hunger radiate through the forest. Some nights, she slept on rooftops, gun beside her, listening to the sound of breathing, the creak of fences, the moan of the corrupted dead. She learned patterns, studied weaknesses, and lived, not gloriously, not heroically, but effectively. Survivors whispered that Carol was untouchable, but she knew the truth. Survival was never certainty. It was patience, caution, and ruthlessness when required. The Modman, a lone survivor known only as Kane, had abandoned reason. He believed the dead were the true rulers now. He spoke to them in whispers, sang to them in the night, laughed as they shuffled through the streets. When Venom appeared, Kane greeted the symbiote as a god. He offered himself freely, convinced that the black being had chosen him as its prophet. The creature ignored him for hours, watching as he performed increasingly erratic rituals. Finally, it touched him with a single tendril. Kane screamed, then went quiet. When the survivors found him later, he was alive but changed. His eyes glimmered white, veins black and pulsing. He no longer spoke of humanity. He whispered only for the symbiote, spreading madness wherever he walked. Even in a world of death, Kane became a warning. The mind could rot faster than the body, and corruption was not always physical. The forest beyond the prison hummed quietly that night. Venom had grown. Its influence spread not just through the dead, but through the living. Heroes, traitors, survivors, madmen each played a role in the unfolding horror, and somewhere deep in the black heart of the forest, the symbiote watched them all, learning, evolving, waiting. The apocalypse had a new master, and humanity had yet to understand the rules of its reign. The night was silent. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of inevitability. Smoke rose from the forest like the ghosts of burned trees. The moon cast pale light over broken highways and empty towns. Everything familiar had been consumed, reshaped, or abandoned. Humanity clung to a thin thread, but even that thread was fraying. Rick Grimes stood alone on the top of the prison watchtower. His hands shook slightly as he held the revolver, though it felt almost meaningless now. The horde of corrupted walkers had grown larger than any army he had ever faced. Black veins pulsed beneath decayed flesh, tendrils of alien symbiotes snaking through the ranks. They moved with intelligence, precision, a collective mind no human could hope to comprehend. Carl and the others were gone, taken, bonded, consumed. Some by the walkers, some by Venom. The symbiote had learned to manipulate fear, weakness, and despair in ways humans could not resist. The world had become a predator's playground, and Rick was nothing but prey. He stared into the forest. The black silhouette of Venom rose above the trees, taller than any man, stretching tendrils outward as if testing the boundaries of its new domain. Its eyes, white and unblinking, reflected centuries of hunger, war, and conquest. Rick remembered the first day he had stood in that watchtower, thinking the dead were the ultimate enemy. Now he understood. The dead had only been a warning. Something older, something stronger had arrived. Something that could consume not only flesh but hope. In the distance, a scream pierced the night, a survivor trying desperately to escape. Another body fell silently, veins black and thrumming, absorbed into Venom's growing hive. Rick dropped to his knees, exhausted. We tried, he whispered. His voice cracked, carried on the wind. We tried to survive. But survival was no longer enough. From the shadows of the broken forest, the symbiote advanced. Tendrils whipped through the air, tearing apart what remained of the barricades. The corrupted horde pressed forward in perfect, horrifying rhythm. Rick fired his revolver once, then again, then another time. The sound of gunfire echoed, swallowed almost instantly by the chaos around him. Bullets shattered bone and rotted flesh. But none stopped the symbiote. It was learning too fast, adapting faster than any human weapon could cope with. He could feel it in the air now, the weight of the predator. Venom was not just hunting them anymore. It was reshaping them. Every corpse it touched, every mind it absorbed, became part of a greater whole. Humanity was no longer master of its own fate. It had become the plaything of a cosmic predator. Rick sank to the ground, bloodied, exhausted, and alone. In the darkness, he saw movement. Not a walker, not a man, something black and terrible, pulsing, alive. A single tendril reached toward him. Rick closed his eyes, and in that moment, he understood the truth of the world now. There would be no victory, no full triumph over the dead, the virus, or the alien intelligence that had arrived from the stars. Only suffering, only loss, only the slow, crushing inevitability of extinction. The tendril touched him, and everything went black. Somewhere deep in the forest, the symbiote laughed. It belonged to the predator. "We are Venom,"